Hello, people. We're going to look at reading comprehension excerpt passage. There are 4 questions. You know the drill, right? You can stop the video here. Quickly give this a read. This is question number 1, question number 2, question 3, and question 4. Okay, it's an absolutely wonderful excerpt, and the reason I picked it up, a couple of reasons why I picked this up. I mean, this is from one of my favorite books. The names here, okay, Ape and the Sushi Master. One of the reasons I picked up this particular excerpt is because of the density of this particular passage. Okay, it has a couple of really complicated thoughts to it, but the complexity reveals itself if you're a good reader. There's not much confusion if you're a really good reader. Okay, if this passage is troubling you a little bit, it means that you're lacking in the fundamentals. Okay, then what is the meaning of fundamentals of reading? A, you do not break the sentences properly. B, you do not understand how punctuation marks work. And 3, you do not understand the connections generally made by pronouns, and some of the other contrast markers and so on and so forth. So you need good fundamentals of reading. Then passages which seem dense may not be as dense. But the other problem with this particular excerpt, okay, and the reason why I picked it up, the other reason why I picked it up is the beauty of the ideas itself. Okay, sometimes ideas, the passage could be really dense per se because it's an unfamiliar subject. Okay, that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is you will see passages where the ideas are complicated and layered. Okay, it's not the subject that is unfamiliar, but the idea itself is layered, and one idea builds over the other. You understand the difference between the two, right? One is an unfamiliar theme or an unfamiliar topic which could increase the density of the passage you're reading. The other is the topic could be quite familiar, but the ideas are layered, or complicated, or the author is trying to explain something that's a little tricky, and therefore needs your focus. Okay, anyways, let's look at the passage. Culture is an environment that we create ourselves. For this reason, and quite contrary to the accepted view in some circles, okay, beware of this kind of stuff. Okay, this part here. Oftentimes bad readers get caught up here. Okay, see, if you notice, in the middle of sentence the author puts double comma pairs like this. Okay, and double comma pair is just an addition, the added an added piece of information that gives extra value to the sentence. And sometimes that the author cannot write a complete sentence again to give that information later. Therefore, the author just sneaks it in the middle of this sentence. And as a good reader, it's important to not get distracted by this piece of information, and at the same time still retain that information. You can't ignore it, but at the same time can't get distracted from the main idea, right? So for this reason, culture does not deserve equal footing with nature is one idea. Within brackets is the other idea. What is the other idea? And quite contrary to the accepted view in some circles. Okay, so what is the assumption here, or what is the extra piece of information the author is giving you? That in some circles, culture is given an equal footing with nature. You have to be able to catch that as well, and that's why the author has emphasized it. Quite contrary to the accepted view in some circles. And see, again, question setters, we get excited when we look at pieces of information like this, or a passage which has extra tidbits like this. Just adds to the puzzle, right? So quite contrary to the accepted view in some circles. So I can ask, okay, that circle of thought, what does it approve of? I can ask you a question like that. What does it approve of? That culture deserves an equal footing with nature. And if you're one of those people who just looks at the question and then looks up for the information for that particular question and looks at the answer, then you will just get it wrong totally. One of the options will be just this as it is: culture does not deserve equal footing with nature, and end up getting confused. Okay, so it's very important you understand the tonal shift within the sentence. Anyway, for this reason, and quite contrary to the accepted view in some circles, culture does not deserve equal footing with nature. According to whom? According to the author. An entire generation of anthropologists has given, okay, look at this part. Okay, has, it's beautiful, because a lot of students, even in grammar questions, you make this mistake, especially in GMAT. You'll notice in sentence correction, you'll see sometimes why is it has? Because this has does not refer to the anthropologist here, not to that. This has refers to the generation. Okay, so when you see a subject which is of the form x of y, the verb agrees with the x, not with the y. Okay, you need to understand that. An entire generation of anthropologists, generation is x, anthropologist is y, has is the verb, has agrees with generation, not with anthropologists. However, if the subject is of the form x of y with a that or a who or a which in the middle, then the verb will agree with the y part. Okay, so an entire generation of anthropologists, that and then it will not be a has anymore. It has to be a have, because whatever comes after that agrees with the precedent to whatever precedes that, okay, or what's called the antecedent, which will be anthropologist in this case. Don't worry about that rule now, because we don't see a who, that, or which here. Okay, again, rules like these, nobody's going to directly ask you a question on that saying what is an antecedent rule or things like that. I mean, probably in some B school exams you do see grammar questions, but in CAT it's been a really long time since we've seen a grammar question. In GMAT, obviously, you won't see grammar questions, but sometimes it helps to know whom the verb is pointing, or to who the verb is pointing to, this guy or that guy, who exactly is being represented by the verb. It's very important for a good reader to understand. Okay, anyways, an entire generation of anthropologists has given this false impression by asking what false impression. Again, this can be a question. What is the false impression that the author is talking about here? Okay, the false impression is that culture deserves an equal footing with nature. That's the false impression, because the author does not agree with it. Has given this false impression by asking whether it is culture or nature that makes us act in a certain way. Natural selection, however, has produced our species, including our cultural abilities. So this is the author making an argument. So this note, if you notice, is just an elaboration of the author's main idea, which has already been made. The author's main idea is that, hey, culture does not deserve equal footing with nature. Okay, this is the author elaborating that natural selection has produced our species, including our cultural ability. So even our culture is coming from the natural selection. So okay, so we're talking about nature here, is not environment nature. Again, one of the options could mislead you by saying environment nature, and we're not talking about that nature, we're talking about human nature. Okay, culture is part of human nature. To say that man's made, okay, this sentence again is important, to say that man is made by culture, as many textbooks still do, is at the same level of accuracy as saying that the river follows its bed. This is what we call an analogy. Okay, an analogy is an event given to you in order to elucidate or elaborate on another event. Okay, the difference between an analogy and a metaphor is that a metaphor, you compare two objects. This is, for example, window of hope. Okay, it's a metaphor, because hope here is being compared to a window. Simile and metaphor are again similar, like I've mentioned earlier. Let's just see the word like. If you see like or as, it's a simile, otherwise it's a metaphor. But basically, simile or metaphor, you compare objects. Analogy, you compare events. Okay, so the river following its bed is an analogy. The author is saying man is made by culture is like saying river follows its bed. While true, again, this is again what you call the caveat phrase, right? So while true, it may be true, okay, the author does not disagree with it. While true, the river also shapes its bed. Okay, so the river follows its bed, but the river also shapes its bed. It's very important for us to understand that part. The current river's flow is the product of the past river's action. In the same way, culture cannot exist apart from human nature, and there is profound circularity in saying that we are the product of culture if culture is the product of us. The profound circularity, again, circular argument. Okay, what's a circular argument? A circular argument is like saying, someone asks you why not going out, because it's sunny outside, and then if someone asks why is it sunny outside, because I'm not going out. You understand the difference, right? So you're not giving the answer, just going back and forth. Okay, obviously there must be some other reason why it's sunny outside, not because you're going out, isn't it? Or you're not going out. So you understand the difference? So circular arguments, basically A leads to B, and then you ask why B, and then you make A the reason. So A is not happening because of B, and B is not happening because of A. That's called circular argument. So the author is saying that there's profound circularity in saying that we are the product of culture if culture is the product of us. Okay. They go hand in hand. Culture cannot exist apart from human nature. It's quite complicated first paragraph, and it's important for you to get it right. Okay, if in the exam, let's say you encounter a paragraph of this nature, please do not try to save time by going off to the next paragraph, because it's important you lay the foundation well. So if you did not get this paragraph properly, you might as well just go back and read it. So the author is saying culture does not deserve equal footing with nature, and then culture is part of human nature. And then to say that man is made by culture is like saying that the river follows its bed. The river doesn't follow its bed per se. Okay, it's just that the river is the one that made the bed in the past. Right. So similarly, we cannot say that, something like this. We cannot really say man is made by culture, because at some point culture itself was made by man, and man here is again human nature. Okay, have to be a little careful about it. The relation between nature and culture. So you know that this is the central idea of the first paragraph, and therefore of the passage as well. Okay. Watch out for the central idea of any passage. Okay, how do you know that you're reading, looking at the central idea of a passage? It will be in the first paragraph, obviously. If it's the first paragraph has an example or a random tale to lead to the point, it'll be there in the second paragraph. But invariably, the last paragraph will reiterate it. Okay, so if you're looking for the answer to a main theme question, look for it in the first paragraph or in the second paragraph or in the last paragraph. But the structure is also important. So is it the idea in the last paragraph that's the main idea, or the idea in the first paragraph, or the beginning of the second paragraph that's the main idea? Is a very good question to ask. Okay, the point is the last paragraph talking about the same thing as the first paragraph? Then the first paragraph obviously is the main idea, isn't it? So it's just elaboration, elaboration, elaboration. And you see some passages like that, same thing the author is talking about. But let's say the last paragraph is a derivative of whatever is there in the first paragraph. Okay, derivative means that we could arrive at the last paragraph based on what we understood in the fifth paragraph. Let's say 6 paragraphs are there. We could arrive at what's there in the sixth paragraph based on what we read in the fifth paragraph. And when we arrive there based on fourth paragraph, third paragraph, second and first. So the first or the second is the introduction, but the main idea is always the sixth paragraph, because we want to, the author wanted to, not we, but the author wanted to reach there. Therefore, the author gave you all these ideas. So that has to be the main idea. So basically the answer to the main theme question should always agree with the last paragraph for sure. Okay. But if you read the passage and you understand the tone of the passage, you will know by the end of the passage whether the last para and the first para speak of the same things or they speak of different things. Okay. For example, in this particular passage, right, this is again what you call the author here, this passage is first of all written in argumentative style. Okay, the argumentative style, the author has an opinion which is counter or contrary to an already existing opinion. That's called an argumentative passage. So an argument is being made, yes, but the argument is against another existing argument. So culture does not deserve equal footing with nature. Is the author arguing against the other set of people who believe that man is made by culture or something like that. So it's an argumentative passage. Okay. But if you notice, the main idea is there right in the first paragraph and it goes on till the end. Whatever you see on the screen here right now, the whole thing has just one main idea. So it's nothing that's changing towards the end of this particular passage. Obviously, there are some other passages we've discussed in the past where, by the time we went to the third paragraph, things changed a little bit. But in this passage, at least, you can be absolutely sure that the whole thing has just one main idea, which is that culture and nature are intertwined in a way. Okay. But not so much. The truth is not, as some people believe, that man's made by culture. That's not true. Okay. The relation between nature and culture reminds me of the mouse and the elephant walking side by side over a wooden bridge. Another analogy. One of the reasons why I picked this up, right? That the way the ideas are laid is really beautiful. You have an analogy of a river. Now you have an analogy of an elephant and a mouse. Okay, so what the author is saying is, I was talking about this example because to highlight something about the relation between nature and culture. Above the noise, the mouse shouts, "Hey, listen to us stamping together." By now the good reader would already know. Okay, what should the good reader know? Should understand, right? The mouse and elephant are walking together and the mouse says, "Hey, listen to us stamping together." You'll think pretty grand of the mouse to think that it's able to stamp along with the elephant. Obviously the elephant's making all the noise, right? The mouse noise doesn't even get registered. Why is the author thinking about it? Who's the elephant and who's the mouse? You have to ask all these questions, right? Because we're comparing nature and culture. So who's the elephant and who's the mouse? At the dawn of an undoubtedly Darwinian millennium, there are still those who claim that human behavior is mainly or entirely cultural. I see this exclusive focus like the mouse with delusions of grandeur. Okay, delusions. The mouse is deluded. The mouse thinks too much about itself, walking next to human nature. So we know what is the culture. People who think that culture is the one that shapes man are obviously like the mouse thinking it's stamping along with the elephant making that noise, right? But it's the elephant, which is the human nature, who sets the tone of everything we do and are. Okay, you watch out for paragraphs like this, even in passages when you're reading them. Entire paragraph will have one analogy. The author is trying to arrive at something very important. You have to get the example spot on. Okay, at the end of the day, you have to understand why the analogy was given. So you can also set an example specific question here saying, why did the author talk about the elephant and the mouse? Okay, what point was the author trying to derive? Or the elephant here is a metaphor for human nature. The mouse is a metaphor for culture, especially if we believe that culture is the one that shapes human nature. Okay, this is not to say, now if you notice, this is not to say is again like a contrast. So earlier the author said in the second paragraph that, hey, the culture part is just like a mouse stamping along with an elephant. We don't need to, care so much. So this is not to say is like the author giving you a slightly contrasting idea. That's what you can expect as a good reader. This is not to say that culture is mere icing on the cake. Icing on the cake is just, something that does that. Okay, icing on the cake is an idiomatic expression. Obviously, you would have heard about it. It means something that comes right at the top and makes things even better. It's not used here like that. Okay, culture is mere. It is not to say that culture is mere icing on the cake. Here, the author is trying to say is not to say that culture is a superficial thing. Okay, so this sentence is actually quite positive and strongly positive about culture, which we did not encounter from here to here. Okay, that's the important part. So there's a tonal change here, which you have to catch when you're reading passages, especially in the exam, when you're reading fast, and it's pressure and you can't reread, right? It's important to register the tonal changes. So this is not to say that culture is mere icing on the cake, as some have suggested. So the author suddenly, so here the people who have suggested, some have suggested, now this is very important. These people are the exact opposite of these people, mind you. So it's important for you to not get confused, right? So some have suggested that culture is just the icing on the cake. These people you're talking about are the people who believe human nature is the bigger deal, not culture. The author is saying, hey, you can't just say, take culture and throw it out of the window. Culture is an extremely powerful modifier. See, the tone for this was set in the previous sentence. Now, a good reader won't be surprised when he or she comes to this part, because we already understood it from the previous part, right? Culture is an extremely powerful modifier. There's a double dash here almost. So you treat this like brackets, right? This is like brackets for you. Affecting everything we do and affecting everything we do and everything we are doing. That's what it means. Penetrating the core of human existence. So, culture is an extremely powerful modifier, no doubt about that. But okay, it's very important. Okay, again, tonal shift. So now that something that undermines culture is going to come next. So this tonal shift is very important for you to pick, because at the end of the day, you have to keep abreast of your reading speed and the way the content is coming. You can't go back and reread again and again because you just end up wasting a lot of time. So I see this, but so again, no, something's undermining culture, but it can work only in conjunction with human nature. It's powerful, yes, but can work only in conjunction with human nature. If you notice, this is quite a reflection of this particular sentence here. Culture cannot exist apart from human nature. Similar, right? This is the main idea of the passage in a way. Culture takes human nature and bends it this way or that way. We know that this as well, right? Because it's the bed that is shaping the course of the river. Careful not to break it. So culture has a role to play. It's not like culture is completely useless. That we have trouble looking through the false dichotomy is due to a peculiar uncertainty principle. Again, the stuff like this gets questions set us excited, because I can ask, what is the false dichotomy here? Okay, what is the meaning of false dichotomy? Dichotomy means two, right? It's very simple. In your 5th standard or 6th standard, you would draw the line and you 5 differences between air and water, for example. Not in 5th class, but I don't know, studied, probably kids these days studied in like standard 1, I guess, I don't know. But you understand that that's the dichotomy part, 2 parts. What's a false dichotomy? False dichotomy is the wrong belief that there are 2 things. Okay, false dichotomy is also a very commonly used logical fallacy. It's a law where if you're convinced that you have only 2 options and to choose one of those 2 options, it's called a false dichotomy. Okay, it happens every day in society, right? Like, I mean, at least in my generation, parents used to always say, hey, you have only 2 options, either you become an engineer or a doctor. So we used to then have to worry, okay, should I choose this or should I that? So we thought we had choice, but because we were only given 2 choices, it's called false dichotomy, where the person never really asks if there is a third choice possible. Okay, that's where you also use the term false dichotomy. But here, what it means is that, false dichotomy is the fact that there is culture or there is human nature. You have to look at it as 2 things, but the author is saying it's a false dichotomy. That we have trouble looking through the false dichotomy. And the author is saying we have trouble looking through this false dichotomy. Why? Because of a peculiar uncertainty principle. There's a colon. Okay, it's such a beautiful punctuation mark. It simply means the author is simply telling you, don't worry, I'm going to explain what's on the left side, on the right side. That's what the colon means, or the single dash means, right? So what is the uncertainty principle? We are unable to take off our cultural lenses, and hence we can only guess at how the world would look without them. That's the uncertainty principle. We are uncertain of how the world is if we take out our cultural lenses. So what are we looking at? We are looking at through the lenses of culture. Therefore, we believe in the false dichotomy that there is culture and there's human nature. That's it. That's not true according to the author. Okay, that is why we cannot discuss animal culture without seriously reflecting on our own culture. We'll stop here. Okay, don't worry about this part. We cannot discuss animal culture without seriously reflecting on our own culture. Why? Because everything we look at in terms of our, our cultural lenses. We can't take it off. That's the uncertainty principle. Okay, so what is the author trying to tell you here? The author is trying to tell you here that, hey, culture is important, but culture functions in conjunction to human nature. It's not a completely different independent force of its own. But we believe in that false dichotomy, that fact that culture is a separate thing and human nature is a separate thing. When they are not, they act together. But we believe that they are separate, the false dichotomy, because of a peculiar uncertainty principle. Because we don't know how the world functions once we remove our cultural lenses. We are addicted to our cultural lenses. Okay, that's what the passage means. Okay, it's a wonderful passage, a lot of analogies and metaphors and ideas, and this is the kind of stuff you should be reading if you want to get comfortable solving good passages. You cannot, no point solving thousands of questions if you're not reading good stuff. Read good stuff, you don't have to solve questions, you have to be able to understand well. Anyway, let's look at the questions. The author mentions the analogy of the river in the first para to elucidate that. Isn't, by now you understand probably, right? Why did the author mention the analogy of the river in the first part? Because the author was saying this is like saying that, but while that is true, that's not the point, isn't it? That's how the structure was laid out. So what is the author trying to elucidate? Human nature shapes culture and not the other way around. And not the other way around is the problematic part in this option, isn't it? Because the author did not establish that it's the bed that is giving the river direction, or it's the river that's giving the bed the direction, and not the other way. It's not what the author was establishing. The author was saying that this and that are connected or related to each other. Yes, the river follows the bed, but at some point it's the river that made the bed. Okay, so both sides have a role to play. So any option that says only one side had a role to play, or only one side is more dominant than the other, you can eliminate the option straight away. Provided you have to understand that in the question. The question is asking you that. So I can eliminate the option the moment it says one A is bigger than B. Okay, because the analogy was to tell you that A and B are functioning together, are two phenomena that act together. Okay, culture arises from human nature, even though it shapes it sometimes. See here, A and B, you don't know the dominant part here, because culture arises from human nature. So human nature is a dominant part in the first half, even though it shapes it sometimes. Okay, so one shapes the other. So culture arises from human nature, even though culture shapes it sometimes. Now the question is this, it is a little confusing. Okay, my apologies for that. But also at the same time, grammatically you can just logically derive, right? The two its have to represent two different things, obviously, otherwise the sentence won't make sense. So you don't have to really worry that there are two its, because one it has to be culture and one it has to be human nature. Now how do I know that it is culture, or this it is human nature? Look at the option itself. Culture arises from human nature. There's an even though, right? Even though it shapes it sometimes. So culture arises from human nature. So if this first it is human nature, the even though is not required, because in both cases human nature becomes dominant. So we know that it has to be culture, and the second it has to be human nature anyway. So the even though is there, therefore you'll not really have to worry about it. You still know that A and B are both equally dominant. So B is a good candidate for the answer. Culture simply follows the course charted by human nature. It's giving human nature all the credit, right? That's not the point of the analogy. Human nature follows the course charted by culture. Culture is getting all the credit, and that's not the point of the analogy, isn't it? So the answer to this particular question will be option B. Okay, the whole point of the analogy was very simple. It's saying, hey, yes, it is true that the river follows the bed, but where did the bed come from in the first place? Isn't it the river that made the past river made the bed? Isn't that's what the author is trying to say? So similarly, fine, culture is giving shape to the to the current human nature, but where did culture come from? Past human nature is the one that made the culture. Okay. Let's look at the next question. The second para tries to establish that, okay, this is what you call a location specific question. Okay, location specific questions are amazing, because they tell you where to look for the information, isn't it? It's never give up on a question which gives you the location, saying second para, third para, fourth para, or fifth para. It just tells you where to search for the information. Good luck to you. If the para is just 2-3 lines, even better for you, right? So any passage has one or two questions like this where you know the location. It's absolutely wonderful. It just saves you 1 or 2 valuable minutes. Anyway, second para tries to establish. The second para gave us the example of the mouse and the elephant. This time you have to be a little careful. Okay, 1 and 3 ideas are very similar, that culture and human nature are equal in nature, but second para is a little tricky that way. Okay, second para is talking about how second para is predominantly about how culture, proponents of culture supremacy are like the mouse. Okay, that's what the second para is trying to tell you. Anyways, proponents of the idea that culture and nature go hand in hand are delusional. Proponents of the idea that culture and nature go hand in hand are delusional. Now, this word itself is enough for you to eliminate. Okay, just because you saw delusion there, please don't pick this as the answer. Okay, don't do a word to word match and pick the answer. That's not the point. Delusion is a very strong negative word. The author is not abusing anybody here. Okay, that's what this option is. It's abusing the proponents and calling them delusional. Delusions of grandeur, okay, or whatever that exact word is. Let me just go back and check. Okay, delusions of grandeur. Yes, so mouse thinks it is great or it is significant when it is not that significant. So it's a delusion. But what is a delusion of grandeur? So it's not delusional, is like completely different from delusions of grandeur. That itself is enough for you to eliminate this option. Now, the other question for you is, let's say I did not make it so easy for you to eliminate this option. Let's say I said proponents of the idea that culture and nature go hand in hand are not correct or are not right. If I say, then can I say A is close to the answer? Proponents of the idea that culture and nature go hand in hand are not correct is not something I can say. Okay, because the author did not make an argument against culture and nature going hand in hand. That was not the author's problem here. Okay, the author was trying to make an argument against this part, who claim that human behavior is mainly or entirely cultural. So it's a little confusing here. It's confusing because in the author's example, the mouse and elephant, all the mouse wants is equality. The mouse doesn't want superiority. So you would say, hey, all the mouse wants is equality, but the author is saying there's no equality. So shouldn't that mean that the author is against the idea that culture and human nature go hand in hand? No, because it's clarified here. The author thinks of that particular example only because of the mouse's delusions of grandeur. The author has got nothing to do with against the equality of culture and human nature. Make sense? The example is only to show, hey, sometimes people could be deluded about their status or the status quo. Just like people thinking about human behavior being mainly or entirely cultural, just like that. Okay, so delusions of grandeur. Be careful there. Anyways, Darwinian philosophy vindicates those who credit natural selection for the course human culture takes. Now, author says what is the point of mentioning Darwin here? That's again a question that good readers should be asking. At the dawn of an undoubtedly Darwinian millennium, there are still those who claim that human behavior is mainly or entirely cultural. Now the question for you is, D is capital Darwinian millennium. If let's say you don't know what is a Darwinian millennium, should you be worried? You need not be worried. Okay, when you do not understand, there's always a connection. What can I infer about the Darwinian millennium? Whatever the Darwinian millennium is, it's against. Okay, at the dawn of the Darwinian millennium, there are still those who claim that the word still is the emphasis here. So claiming that human behavior is cultural is totally against the ethos of the Darwinian millennium. That's what we can infer about Darwinian millennium here, and we get all that information just from this. There are still those people, which means these people are not a good fit for the Darwinian millennium. Now, what else do we know about Darwinian? The meaning of the term Darwinian is natural selection, okay, and evolution. That's all you need to know. You don't have to know anything beyond that. So Darwinian philosophy vindicates, now there is no defensive mechanism or no argument to support this part, those who credit natural selection for the course human culture takes, because the author himself or herself, himself in this case, does not credit natural selection for the course human culture takes, first of all, right? So there is no question of being vindicated. Vindicated means being proven right. So there's no question of this at all. Secondly, we don't know what is Darwinian philosophy. It's an alien term. So we can very easily eliminate this option. This option shouldn't have troubled you. Culture's role in human behavior is blown beyond proportion, exaggerated, isn't it? This is what we are looking for, is blown beyond proportion, delusions of grandeur, isn't it? Exaggerated. Does the option say culture's role in human behavior is non-existent? No, the author was never saying that. Okay, the author says, yeah, they go hand in hand, but you got to be deluded if you think culture is the most important thing. It's not, right? It is human nature and not culture that influences human behavior. The author says culture does not necessarily influence human behavior, but the author does not give 100% credit to human nature. Now, if you go back to the passage, isn't it? I see this exclusive focus, like the mouse with delusions of grandeur walking next to human nature. The elephant who sets the tone, that's it, sets the tone of everything we are is not the same as it's human nature that influences human behavior. So this part is the problem here. It's human nature and not culture is literally saying culture is out of the picture. The author is not saying culture is out of the picture. Author is simply saying culture's whole human behavior is blown beyond proportion. So these two options, first of all, you should have arrived at the part where you said, hey, C and D are my two close options. You have to have come to this point. And then you have to ask between C and D, what's the difference? Do a C minus D. C is saying culture's role is not as big as what it seems. D saying culture has no role, extreme option, right? Author never said culture has no role. Therefore, the answer to this particular question will be option C. The author's use of the term false dichotomy in the last para is to illustrate the argument. That illustrate which argument you have to, it's important. Okay, we are not worried about what false dichotomy is, but the author used the term to argue what. Okay, that's the question. Culture and human nature are intertwined. This is what the author was trying to argue. Yes, culture is not just a superficial concept. Fair enough. Culture is not just an icing on the cake, as it bends human nature. Now, this is the problematic part. Okay, culture is not just a superficial concept. Fair enough. Culture is important. Okay, this is part of the argument the author is trying to make. But culture is not a superficial concept because it bends human nature. Still leaves it open, right? Still does not explain to us the whole story. You understand the difference? So if I do an A minus B, the difference is the word intertwined. That's all there is to it. Culture and human nature are intertwined is the argument the author is trying to make. The author is not trying to make the argument that culture is not superficial because it bends human nature. So what is it? It's a little deeper than that. Fair enough, we get it. But does it tell you that they are intertwined? No. That's the argument the author is trying to make. That's the argument the author wants us to see by telling you that there is no false dichotomy. These two are connected. Okay, the moment I say bends human nature, even though it's true partially because of the river and bed example as well, because it's true, but this was not the purpose to, this was not the purpose of the whole explanation. Not the paragraph is not written to tell you that, hey, it's not an icing on the cake. It's a point. It's not just icing on cake, it's important. But the main argument is this, okay, that they're intertwined. So it's important that you separate out these two really close options, right? Culture affects everything human beings do. But this is not the argument again, because where is human nature here? So you can remove this. Plus, we are talking about human behavior here, so easy to eliminate. Culture can bend human nature, but not break it. Fair enough. But are we talking about breaking human nature? No, we are talking about intertwined. Okay, so the author's use of false dichotomy was not to tell you this part, that culture cannot break human nature. Why does he have to talk about false dichotomy when he's talking about bending and breaking human nature? No point, right? So at all points of time, it's not just about you looking at the options and asking, and a lot of students do this. I notice you look at an option and say, is this true or false? It could be true, but may not be the answer, because the question asks what the question wants to ask, isn't it? You can't just say, hey, this is true, therefore this will be the answer. You have to still figure out why this term was used. Why was the term false dichotomy used? False dichotomy was used to tell you that they are not two separate things, they are together. So you have to look for the option where it says together. So you look for an option that has something positive in it, which is intertwined. Okay, BCD, you can just, so on tone you can eliminate BCD. And that's how easy it gets if you understand spot or grasp the tone of a particular paragraph, right? Or a particular set of sentences. Let's look at the next question. So obviously the answer to this question is A. The peculiar uncertainty principle mentioned in the last para can be observed in which of the following statements? What does it mean? In which of the following statements am I going to see a demonstration of how human beings have trouble looking into the world without their cultural lenses? So we're looking for a sentence that proves that human beings use their own cultural lenses to, judge other things. Human beings often make anthropomorphic arguments in conjunction to animals. Okay, so this obviously sits right into the uncertainty principle, because what is anthropomorphic arguments? Anthropomorphic arguments is basically arguments where we think of animals as if they are human beings. Okay, which is a big mistake a lot of us human beings do, including animal lovers. Sometimes, we tend to think of animals as if they're human beings, but that may not be true. They probably have their own identity. Okay, it is our projection that we think, animals think exactly like human beings, or animals have similar culture to human beings, or we try to define the identity of animals as if they were human beings. Okay, we try to use terms which we generally apply to human beings on animals, including loyalty and friendship and anger and revenge and whatnot. But all of that is just human beings anthropomorphizing. Okay, so why? Because we have our cultural lenses. Human culture is what we're trying to project according to the author. Okay, I'm not making any comments, and animal lovers need not get angry with me for now, or animal haters who are there. The author is trying to talk about that peculiar uncertainty principle that can be seen in this particular statement. Okay. Human beings do not seem to grasp that their culture is a product of their nature, but we don't know how uncertainty is playing a role here. Okay. Uncertainty was with respect to our cultural lenses. Human beings do not seem to grasp that their culture is a product of their nature, does not bring the cultural lenses into the argument. This one is talking about where the origin of that cultural lens is, but that's not what we are talking about. We're talking about us not being able to remove the cultural lenses. So B can be eliminated. Human beings seem to forget that there was a time when human culture did not exist is the other close option. But again, here, C is still talking about time when culture didn't exist, but uncertainty principle is at a time when culture exists, but there is a world outside that culture too. And we're still not able to look at that world without the cultural lenses. It's not about going back, but looking at the world right now without our cultural lenses. So C can be eliminated. Human culture works in conjunction with our environment. Then what is the uncertainty principle here? This is actually pretty positive, isn't it? And we're looking for something which has a negative tone to it, right? So the answer to this particular question is option A. That brings us to the end of this particular video. I hope you benefited from it. It's important that you grasp some of the nuances of critical reasoning here. Please learn to read sentences properly. The longer sentences especially, do not hurry too much. Try to find a nice rhythm, nice speed to the way you read. Okay, many times I notice that people try to read too fast, and their comprehension is lagging, so they have to come back again. Not good way of reading. Your comprehension and reading should go at the same pace. Only then you can tackle with slightly confusing layered ideas like in this passage. Okay, until next time, peace out.